Welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Dylan and today I'm very happy to be joined by Federal Member of Parliament Mike Morrice. Yeah. Mike Morrice is the Federal Member of Parliament for Kitchener Centre. He is a member of the Green Party and was elected in 2021. So if you want to introduce yourself further than that, that would be great.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Well, just really nice to meet you, Dylan. Thanks for inviting me to be part of the show. And yeah, I ran actually for the first time, as some folks might know. I ran in 2019 for the first time and wasn't successful. Ran again in 2021 in both cases because I just felt like it was pretty existential, the climate crisis in particular, but really wanted to be a strong voice for my community when it comes to many of the crises we're facing, from housing to mental health. And I think it's a real privilege to get to serve my community in this way. And always happy to chat about proportional representation.
Yeah. So, yeah, as he alluded to, and as the video title suggests, today we're talking about proportional representation and just what Mike does as an MP, as a member of the Green Party. So, to start, would you like to explain to my audience who might not be familiar with the term what proportional representation is?
Yeah, sure. Well, we should probably start with how we elect people today. So proportional representation is a electoral system. We do not have proportional representation in Canada today. Instead, we have something called, and it's a jargony name, first past the post. And folks might already know how first past the post works. But the short version is that it's kind of like a winner take all approach. So you have ridings that are distributed across the country. Different parties might put forward a candidate in each riding, and under first past the post, the person who receives the most votes in any one location is the representative for that community. Under proportional representation, there is a shift towards ensuring that the percentage of MPs represented in the House of Commons for any given party would have a closer match to the percentage of people who have voted for that person, regardless of where they live across the country. And there's a lot of different ways of setting up, like there's different types of proportional representation. But in fact, most modern democracies around the world have actually already either moved to or established themselves under proportional representation, because it's kind of the more logical way of thinking of our democracy. You'd think that if 10% of people vote a certain way, then 10% of the seats, which seems a kind of common sense, would be represented for that party in the elected legislature. And so that's the kind of core idea. It's a big part of, to be clear, why I support it so strongly and why I've been putting quite a bit of time and energy, both before I was elected and in the time since, into building support for proportional representation. Because in my view, it's a way of ensuring that that people have their voices heard, and that our legislatures reflect the actual votes that were made.
First of all, I'd like to say that I love your use of the term common sense, but yeah. Okay. So my next question is, why is the Green Party the only party that is 100% pro-proportional representation? And how do you respond to the allegation that it's just because the Green Party's a small party that would increase its seat share by like 7% if there was proportional representation? Like, how do you respond to that argument from anti-proportional representation people?
Yeah, first of all, it's a great point. We have to always be mindful of where there are biases and where there is self-interest at play. And certainly it's a great point that Greens, as a smaller party, would be one of the political parties that would be advantaged by proportional representation. You might have the numbers closer to you, Dylan, than I do from the last election, but it was probably, something like 4% folks across the country who voted for the Green Party in the last election. And so 4% of 338 seats, you'd be looking at more like 13 or 14 Green MPs. Whereas right now, there are only two Greens elected, myself and Elizabeth May. And so I think, answering your question, What's important is removing the partisanship from the conversation. And that means looking at groups like Fair Vote Canada, for example. My approach is to try to amplify experts from outside of partisan political parties. And whether it's groups like Fair Vote Canada or every commission we've ever had from any parliamentary group, there's been like 7 or so since the early 1900s. And every single time any group of nonpartisan experts have looked at Canadian democracy and thought about how do we best improve this and what electoral system is best suited to Canada, every single time they come back saying that first past the post is not ideally suited and that we should be considering and moving towards proportional representation. I guess another way of looking at it that I feel it's important to share is that as a Green MP, my goal is not to simply bring forward positions from the party, but really to be focused on what I hear from people in my community. It's actually a big part of why I decided to run as a Green in the first place. Full disclosure, when I ran for the first time, I was actually not a member of any political party prior to running. And I wanted to make sure I chose a party that would allow me to stay true to myself, that would not tell me how to vote or what to say. There's some shared values that Greens have, but Greens are really committed to making sure that our communities come ahead of the parties. And so separate from the interests of the Green Party and the political positions of the Green Party, which, participatory democracy is one of the values of the party. So it wouldn't be a surprise that folks who really care about our democracy want to see that democracy improved. When I think about people in my community and the doors I've knocked on, the number of people who told me in 2019 and 2021 that they want to see me advocating for proportional representation because they want to see a more diverse, a more collaborative, a more respectful, a more equitable parliament. That's really what has had me kind of platform this issue as much as I have. But the shorter answer to the question is that you're absolutely right. Political parties stand. Some will benefit and some will be disadvantaged. And so I would encourage folks to look at nonpartisan experts who are looking at our democracy and what they're recommending that we do. And I think you'll find in almost every single case recommendations to switch to PR.
Yeah, I'll have a question for you later about your ability to serve and stay true to your values as a Green MP later. But my next question is, you were talking about how PR is suited to Canada. So a common concern I hear about proportional representation is just Canada is a gigantic country, like second largest landmass in the world. And the thing is, our population's so scattered that, like, for instance, let's take my province of Saskatchewan. If we had any system, like, I don't see many people advocating for like open list PR or closed list PR just because then there would be no local representation. But almost any proportional system would result in larger ridings. So how do you respond to the concern that it would lead to a decrease of local representation in our democracy?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a red herring argument because it sounds like different systems really well, and there are a number of systems operating all across Europe, for example, that ensure that there's still really close riding representation. That you don't need to lose that when we look at proportional representation. But I will admit that nothing is perfect. Compared to the status quo, though, let's use Saskatchewan as an example. I believe Saskatchewan has 14 MPs. Is that right?
Yeah.
And in the House of Commons today, all 14 ridings that are meant to, encapsulate the views of all folks across Saskatchewan, under winner take all, first past the post, while in every single riding, the party that got the most votes was the Conservative Party. And under first past the post, what that means is that every single person in Saskatchewan, no matter where you are, is represented by a Conservative MP. And so if Conservatives got 100% of the vote, that'd be just fine. 100% of the MPs are Conservative, 100% of the people voted Conservative. That would make sense to me. But of course, we know that that's not the case, right? You probably have the numbers closer to you than I do for
I
the
think it was
percentage of
like
votes.
60% for the Conservatives in Saskatchewan.
Right. So what that means then is that 40% of people in Saskatchewan are not represented in the House of Commons by a person that is with a party that they voted for. And so to me, that's like a fundamental failure of first past the post, is to leave that many people for whom their votes, they still counted, like they physically were counted at the ballot box, but they didn't amount to any political power for those people. And that to me doesn't promote a healthy democracy. It doesn't lead, if we had PR, you might have more people choosing to vote because they say, well, that's going to get reflected at the end of the day. Versus anybody who votes for any other party in Saskatchewan right now might say, well, like, what's the point of all this if at the end of the day my riding under winner take all has had X number of terms where it's been a conservative MP, and with the dilution of first past the post, what it also then leads to is it leads to other parties then doing this fear-based thing where you say, well, I have to vote to keep someone else out, so I need to vote for this party, not because I actually believe in that party, but because I need to try to beat this other party. And so there's all the kinds of this gamesmanship that comes with first past the post in Saskatchewan being a prime example. But I appreciate what you're saying though too, Dylan, that like there are different types of PR. We can go through each and talk about different ways that we can have good local representation, mixed with some kind of balancing to ensure that there's a kind of a closer connection between the percentage of the votes and the representation that folks in Saskatchewan, for example, have less of.
Okay, my final question in regards to concerns about proportional representation. Could proportional representation lead to government instability in Canada? Like, for example, we are seeing right now that we have our first, like, at a federal level, we have the first, like, coalition of any kind since, like, the war era, if I'm correct. And that's already leading to instability and questions of whether that deal will last. So, do you think under proportional representation with a very fragmented parliament that we could have like instability where we have elections every like few months or few years, like what we see in some places?
Well, I think what is true is the chance of a majority government would be a lot lower, because right now we have a lot of what I would call false majorities. So in Ontario, for example, right, where you have one party with 100% of the power, and they got, I think it was some kind of 38 some odd percent of the vote in the last election. When you look at the percentage of people that actually voted, I think it ends up being 18% of
Or
Ontarians.
Quebec,
Sorry?
or Quebec.
Yeah, Quebec would be another. Totally. Both cases to me kind of exemplify the huge swings between what percent of people voted for the party and then how much power they have. And so you're right. And you mentioned earlier, it's a big country, a lot of different positions of a lot of different people with different perspectives. And so the chance that over half the people across the country would all vote for the exact same party would be a lot lower. But the idea that a coalition government, which I want to also be careful, we don't actually have a coalition right now. And I know some people in those comments like calling it a coalition. It's, as I think you likely know well, Dylan, because it seems like you're pretty well researched on this stuff. It's a supply and confidence agreement, which surely just means there's two parties who have made a deal to say that we've got enough shared interests that one party is supporting the other in exchange for a set of policy demands. And we can totally debate those. I'm not a member of either one of those two parties. And so I have some pretty strong opinions about it myself. But that isn't a coalition. There's no members of the NDP in cabinet, for example, and under actual coalitions, which exist all across Europe, of course, that would be the case. But so anyway, the premise to the question was that a coalition is less stable, that democracy would be more fragile. That might be the case. You might have elections more often under minority governments. But to me, what's also true and makes it worth it is that people's voices are reflected more directly. You can have more collaboration across. You'd have less divisive attacks because you wouldn't have to do all that fear mongering stuff I was mentioning earlier. So again, I'm not going to pretend that it's perfect, but I think any claims of things being less stable are more than made up for with, that fact that under PR, people's views are reflected. And that I think will only serve to improve our democracy in a whole variety of different ways. And that it's good when people's different perspectives get to be voiced in various legislatures, including our House of Commons.
So, touching on the two parties in the supply and confidence deal, that's why I was doing this when I mentioned coalition.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool.
Yeah, mentioning those two parties, you are not, again, as you said, you're not a member of either of them, but you get associated with both of them a lot, as all three of you, I would say, are left of center parties. So, what distinguishes, like, I doubt this needs a very long answer, but what distinguishes the Green Party from the NDP or the Liberal Party?
Yeah, the biggest distinguishing factor, in my view, is that focus on communities ahead of parties and people ahead of partisanship. And so that as a Green, we have 6 shared values. And those are things like participatory democracy and nonviolence, ecological wisdom, but that I can focus on what I'm hearing from constituents. And that means that on a really important vote, like the Emergencies Act, that was invoked, as you know, a couple of years ago, I believe I was the only person outside of the Conservative Party who voted against.
And block. The block.
And I put forward, you can find on my website, mikemorrice.ca/blog. You'll see a post explaining why I voted that way, which was different than how Elizabeth May voted. But then it also meant that when we had other parties who were caving on carve-outs to carbon pricing, which I believe really strongly in, that when the NDP voted against carbon pricing, I was able to stay on the right side of that. And so to me, that's a really important distinction that we get to try to stay above the fray of the partisanship and the divisiveness and try to just be a really strong voice for my community. And that has me sleeping well at night. Like I don't have to rationalize or ever lie about why I voted a certain way. I get to come back to my community. Not that everybody agrees on everything, and plenty of folks have disagreed even on those 2 examples I just shared. Not everyone in Kitchener Center feels the same way, but at least when I knock on doors all through the summer, when someone asks me about a particular vote, I can tell them what I was actually thinking and what I heard and what my process was and why I voted the way I did. And you're right. There's a lot that, particularly the NDP and Greens, share. But that, to me, was the difference maker for why I decided to run as a Green and why I feel really privileged to be able to do this in a way that I think avoids everything I hate about politics and allows me to stay focused on the democracy part that I love.
I was gonna touch on your Emergencies Act invocation, and for full honesty, I try and stay nonpartisan. That is my favorite thing about you, is the fact that you were the only left of center MP to oppose the Emergencies Act, or I shouldn't say invocation, like the extension of it. You were the only left of center MP to do that, which I strongly appreciate. But the Liberal government very much deemed that a confidence vote, which is why many MPs like Nate Erskine-Smith and Joel Godin and not Joel Godin, Joel Lightbound. Yeah, they were whipped into voting in favor of it. So my question is, today, Pierre Poilievre put out a big fancy letter saying that Singh should pull out of the confidence and supply agreement. There's confidence votes all the time. If you were, when you go back in September to the House of Commons, if there was a vote of confidence, how would you vote? And does the Green Party, or you specifically, still have confidence in this government?
Well, I can tell you one thing that I love about being a Green is that there are no whipped votes. And I think it's pretty unfortunate that 99.5% of the votes in the House are the same across party lines. I think that is pretty indicting on what partisanship can do to our democracy. I can tell you the last confidence vote we had was the budget. And you might know I voted against the budget. I had really strong concerns with the the lies with respect to the Canada Disability Benefit. There are so many folks living in poverty in my community with disabilities that were promised so much more. We didn't see a Canada Disability Benefit that reflected what the government had been promising for so long. We didn't see climate action that matched the rhetoric. We saw more subsidies, billions and billions of new subsidies through carbon capture, for example, to the oil and gas industry that's already made 65 some odd billion in 2022. Apparently that's not enough for this government. So I'm not the best at what ifs because I just try to be honest, and who knows where we are in a few weeks' time, right? But I can tell you the last chance I had on what was a confidence vote on the budget, I voted against. There are some measures, though, that this government has introduced that I have supported that I think help people in my community. And so my interest is more in using the political influence that I have, that I've been gifted by my community as their MP, to get wins. And we got amendments passed on the Canada Disability Benefit that are going to index it to inflation. I was able to get 4 of 10 measures passed to curb the exploitation of international students in my community, as well as the knock-on effects of the dramatic increases in temporary residents in my community, of which international students are a big part. And so I'm not trying to dodge the question, but there's the example of the most recent confidence vote and kind of how I think about my votes. Truthfully, I think it's all political posturing, this talk of a confidence vote. We know that those parties are not doing very well in the polls and have no incentive to call an election anytime soon. And so we're likely not going to see an election until October 2025. If you just look at the fundraising numbers and the polls for those two parties, I don't think the NDP or Liberals are too keen for an election anytime soon. The Conservatives certainly are, though, and so I think you'll continue to see Mr. Poilievre give any angle possible to push for an early election. For my part, I'm just going to keep doing my job for as long as folks in my community will kind of give me the confidence to do so. And if that means we continue for another year, so be it. If it means we have an election in 2 months, ready for that too.
Well, thank you for that answer. And I think that's the end of this interview. So I just want to thank you very much for coming on the channel. Obviously, as I mentioned before, I think you and I might disagree on a lot of like political policy issues, but I was very honored to have you on my channel. And I appreciate your open and honest approach to answering these questions. So thank you very, very much for that. And I hope to interview more left-wing politicians on my channel as I go on. So is there anything you want to say in closing?
Just I really appreciate you, Dylan. I love conversations like these. I'm so glad you reached out. I certainly hope you have more MPs who join you. I believe it's conversations like these that make our democracy better, and particularly amongst young people. I know in Kitchener, we have so many young people who are so engaged in our democracy, and I'm glad that's the case in Saskatchewan too. So yeah, I just really appreciate you for this, and feel free to reach back out again. All right.
Thank you very much for joining me today. Take care.